When the carbon tax was guaranteed, with the Prime Minister cementing her leadership over the Labour Party, where are we at when it comes to the war of words over coal seam gas production and water resources? Well, it's instructive to consider the US experience, a decade ahead of us in terms of regulation and with a more established discourse and dialogue with stakeholders on the topic, as I found out when I spoke with a research scientist and senior policy advisor in energy in Australia this week as guests of the US Study Centre. Who owns what when it comes to land rights? Because in Australia...
Yes, there's a big difference between Australia and the United States in terms of who owns the gas. And that is going to have a big impact on the response of the local communities. In the US, by and large, the landowner owns the mineral rights or the gas rights underneath. And in Australia, of course, they're owned by the Crown. So when a gas company goes out in the US and they go to a landowner and they say, you know, we'd like to buy your gas rights and we'd like to drill on your land, the landowner gets significant compensation, sometimes in the order of $1 million or more for that right. And so in Australia, where the Crown owns it, there's going to be an inherent conflict there between the landowner rights and the gas companies that exists in the US, but not nearly to the same extent.
Scott, the estimates on peak production of coal seam gas are that anything upwards of 120,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of water are being used. Are we really getting it right in saying this commodity that we're producing warrants that amount of usage of such a precious commodity?
Yeah, I don't think there's really an absolute answer to that. It really depends on where you are in the world and within a given country, where you are in that country. But policymakers do need to make a serious upfront assessment of the question you just asked and need to examine the trade-offs.
You know, isn't the reality that at this point in the cycle where pressure's on to pay down debt, state governments are effectively bankrupt, you know, environmental concerns take very much a back seat in all of this?
Yeah, I think you have to look very carefully at the individual case and look at it in a really, with a real clear mind. The language that's often used about water usage can be quite misleading. I mean, the water usage for shale gas in Texas is sometimes referred to as staggering, but it seldom amounts to more than about 1% of the water use in the local area.
But no, not really. So in Texas, 1 to 2% of the water use is a statewide number on an annual basis. When you start focusing in on local areas, you get different numbers, like 3% in Arlington. But if you go out in a rural area that might be a little more like Australia, where people are depending on scarce groundwater supplies, and you start asking not the statewide question, but rather a subset of a particular aquifer, you can get numbers like 30 and 40%. And even if the numbers were only 10 or 20%, depending on the specific hydrogeologic situation, if a 10 or 20% withdrawal is enough to lower the water level in that part of an aquifer and cause wells to stop working or allow salt water to intrude, then you've got a real problem on your hands, even though the statewide number is a mere 1%.
When you say a real problem, are you effectively saying once salt water gets into that system, there's no practical way of reversing it?
That's outside my expertise to talk about what you can do there. I know there are some remediation techniques that can be undertaken, or you may have to relocate a well, but it's certainly a big problem if existing water wells stop working.
Ian, just put into perspective the very real concern in Australia of a great artesian basin, a critical water source across 3 states, and here we have it intersect with arguably the epicenter of coal seam gas operations. Now, draw on some parallels, if you could, with what is playing out of the US.
We don't have anything exactly analogous to the Great Artesian Basin. I actually grew up inside the Great Artesian Basin, so I'm pretty familiar with it. There are widespread aquifers in the US, and there is a concern. In Louisiana, they started using one of these aquifers for coal shale gas exploitation. And there was a protest by the local government because some of their wells started to drop in level, and they moved over to using surface water. There's also a move in the US to use municipal wastewater for fracturing, and also brackish water. One of the biggest technological breakthroughs in the last couple of years is that 3 or 4 years ago we thought that you had to use fresh water for fracturing. Now they've discovered you can use fairly salty brackish water for fracturing. So that changes things quite a bit.
We've seen France, South Africa banning fracking in light of the jury still being out. Can you apply that same logic to the arguments raging here and say, look, we would be far better placed just to hold fire until the dust has settled on all these different opinions?
Yeah, so one thing I've been really pleased with over here in Australia is that people don't seem to be unduly alarmed about hydraulic fracturing as a problem. In the United States and a number of other countries, when people talk about the problems caused by gas development, they hold up hydraulic fracturing as the thing that causes the problems. And it's very confusing because people use the term in two different ways. Some people use it to refer to the entire gas development process. So when they say hydraulic fracturing has caused a problem, they may mean something entirely different from hydraulic fracturing. They may mean an aquifer impact like we were discussing, or some sort of pollution caused by improper waste disposal. But hydraulic fracturing in its proper technical sense is no more than a small part of the drilling and completing of a well where you pump stuff down at a high pressure.
The fact is, though, in the areas that we're talking about that are in contention here, you're pumping down groundwater, which farmers are obviously reliant on.
Yes. So again, the issue, though, is not that the hydraulic fractures have caused pollution, which
far
is
from
what...
it, but essentially we're taking a scarce resource, this is what the debate's about, diverting that for another use, and then we're robbing Peter to pay.
That's the issue, right. So I'm just pleased that people are better able to articulate what the real issue is. And that, to me, that's not a hydraulic fracturing issue, that's a water supply issue. Do we have adequate water supplies in a given location to develop this resource without causing undue problems? That is a fundamental question that needs to get answered, I think, before large-scale development. But it's also a question that has to be answered on a fairly local basis. You're going to get different answers in different parts of that basin as to what the impacts are.
I think one thing we've been impressed of so far in our Australia visit is the realization that Australia is probably ahead of the US in terms of water management, in terms of looking at the holistic view of all this water. And you have to really look at the big picture. And I think up in the Surat Basin, for example, which is part of the Great Artesian Basin, they're starting to get a consensus there, perhaps between the farmers and the gas companies and the government agencies, as to how this integrated water management should occur. I think one thing they're working towards, which they haven't done yet, is at the moment each company is doing a water management plan, and they're doing modeling. And what needs to happen is this has to be integrated on a basin-wide level so you can see how it all fits together. And I think there's movement in that direction. I think both the companies and the government agencies have seen that this has to take place. And it's only when you do that can you answer the questions, the important questions that you've been raising.
What's been the most destructive example that you can look to in the United States of when something's gone wrong, and but for an adequate regulatory system, things might have been a whole lot different?
Right. So there have been far too many examples in the United States where groundwater has been polluted from oil or gas operations. The single biggest cause for pollution is spills at the surface that then percolate down into the water. And I would define spills broadly to also include improper storage of the waste, typically in pits where it seeps through the bottom because they haven't properly constructed the pit, or sometimes in tanks where storage tanks where they're not inspected well enough and they corrode and spring a leak.
Are we referring to carbon dioxide? What are when you say the waste?
Oh, I'm talking about so the produced water is usually in the United States. I'm not quite sure about here, but usually it's extremely salty, as much as 3 times as salty or even 6 times as salty as seawater. And plus, it has other chemicals in it. Some of the chemicals are in the frac fluid that's injected and then comes back up with the produced water, and other chemicals were down in the formation and then they come up along with the frac chemicals. So what you have with this wastewater from oil and gas operations is very toxic stuff that needs to be properly disposed of, and the single biggest cause of water pollution in the U.S. from this industry is mishandling of that waste.
On that one, your analysis finding no scientific evidence supporting contamination of groundwater by hydraulic fracturing in the United States at all.
I'm going to help him out. I agree. That's the point I'm making. It's not hydraulic fracturing that caused those problems. It's mismanagement of waste. It's spills and it's improper storage.
Just to clarify, in your analysis finding contamination predated and or was unrelated to drilling activity in all cases.
What I'm saying, not with hydraulic fracturing in general, but hydraulic fracturing related to shale gas. In the
How can you be so sure, though?
Well, you know, certainty is a difficult commodity to come by. However,
but you have that in abundance. You're able to say, I find no scientific evidence at all. That's about as unequivocal as it can get.
There's been very little scientific study, but what information we have, the accusations of, say, in Pennsylvania and North Texas, of people who say, my water well's been polluted. And you say, well, what are the pollutants? Well, they say it's very high in iron, it's high in manganese, and there's a small amount of arsenic in it. In those areas where you look at water analyses done in that area prior to shale gas drilling, you find the same kind of contaminations. It's just native. And there is no reason to think that these wells are any different. One of the issues is my real concern about groundwater pollution is not groundwater pollution seconds after the well was drilled, or days, or weeks, or months, or even years. It's what's going to happen in tens of years. And that's the thing we have to be concerned about, and that's why I really support what Scott is doing in trying to improve the well completion techniques and improve well integrity. It would actually be magical thinking to think that pollutants could get out of these wells seconds after they get drilled. People, a lot of people who complained about their water being polluted started complaining like when the day drilling started or a week later.
So I want to ask you though, just to clarify, there's been no Armageddon-style event in the United States with all of this going terribly wrong, or has there?
Yeah, so I wouldn't use the word Armageddon. There have certainly been local situations where significant damage was done from this perspective of the local people. But there's been nothing that destroyed a whole basin's worth of water or anything like that.
And even in those local areas, we're not quite sure what role shale gas played. For example, there was a town in Louisiana and their community well ran dry after shale gas started to extract water around it. But we don't know that that well wasn't about to run dry anyhow.
Ian Duncan, Scott Anderson, appreciate your time. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Guest of the US Study Center this week.